Okay, so the first question is,
Okay.
as a therapist,
Yes.
what is the best way to approach sexual addiction?
Okay. Firstly, when we talk about sexual addiction, usually people think that addiction is all about the pornography, the masturbation, and what have you. No, that's not actually what we mean primarily when we talk about sexual addiction. When we talk about sexual addiction, we're looking at some of the underlying factors, all right, that are giving rise to those external manifestations. When I talk about healing factors, I mean some kind of psychological issues, experiences that someone might have gone through in life that has predisposed him or her to, to be in such a compulsive situation. I give you an example. A particular lady reported the case of lesbianism to us, and then usually people will just dabble into talking about the lesbianism, but that's not where we are to start, right? So the first thing to do was to take her down the lane, all right, to find out the root cause, the entry point of that lesbianism, right? And in the course of trying to find out the entry point, a lot of things were discovered. And I tell you, if we fail to discover to treat some of those things that were discovered, we cannot help her to overcome that lesbianism. So in the course of trying to, probe her, we discovered that when she was 8 years, she was raped by her uncle. All right. So along the line where she left that place, she had already been emotionally damaged. All right. So she went to a school, and in this school, she met other female who were equally raped by their relatives and acquaintances. So that formed an association. And within this context, these were people who were already emotionally biased towards men. But the young lady in question admitted to hate the uncle, hated the uncle, and this hatred transmitted to every other man around her. So she just naturally hated men. That's an issue if you are dealing with lesbianism. But if we were to approach it from the outset, you discover that we will not have gotten to the part where we noticed that she hated men. Now, along the line, she joined people of like minds while in school, and they formed an association of lesbian friends, right? Then you see there is now a case of wrong association that was not mentioned when she came. And then when this same young lady traveled, let's to Kaduna, she had an episode where a young man wanted to rape her, and she stabbed that young man to death. Now you see, now there's a case of murder. The girl is also traumatized, so she ran away, going to Abuja where she stayed all those period. But for someone who had been exposed to sexual hypersexual experience, so she needed to cope with that kind of experience by indulging into pornography, right? Where she watched women making out with women, something that she's already addicted to. So you see, there is a case of pornography that was not mentioned. Now, when you watch pornography, you tend to put certain level of pressure on your body, all right, and that leads to masturbation. So she was equally into masturbation. Now, when she came, she only told us that she was suffering from lesbianism. Now, if you're not an experienced therapist, you might dabble into talking about the lesbianism, probably say do this or do that. But you see, if you don't take care of the fact that she's emotionally damaged, you are not going to help her out. So that's the factor point. If you don't address the fact that she has hatred for men, you see, it's a major factor point, because so long as that hatred continues, she cannot be recovered from that lesbianism. So that's the factor point. Now she murdered someone, so there's this. She's living with guilt. All right, so she's also traumatized because of that. Even though she did it in self-defense, but she has killed a human being. She's living with the guilt. So there's something also that needs to be treated. Now, she also indulged in masturbation, pornography. Now, if you don't address these issues, you are not going to help her overcome lesbianism. And you see that the best way to look at pornography, to addiction per se, is not necessarily the case reported. Is to go beyond that, find other issues, all right, other issues that are hidden behind the scene. Because when you don't address those issues, every effort you make to, or you attempt to helping that person overcome whatever addiction that he or she reported, is really going to be a very difficult thing. So the best way to approach the issue of addiction is to look beyond what was reported. Look beyond the pornography, look beyond the masturbation, and find out what need is this individual trying to meet by acting out. All right. So you look at it generally. Addiction is actually a product of three major complications. We have the neurological complication, we have the psychological complication, like I just stated the case of the young client, and also we also have the spiritual complication. All right. So these complications need to be addressed if you must treat sexual addiction. So the approach that is also recommended is to look at it from these diverse angles. I have seen a lot of Christians who probably, as a result of deliverance, they feel they have, after deliverance, the client probably is no longer into the pornography. That's fine, that's possible. All right, that's the work of the Holy Spirit. And apart from that, when you expel the demon will go. But you see, the problem now is that you've just taken care of the spiritual aspect of that addiction, right? Because the demon has been expelled. But there's this other neurological factors that has taken place as a result of that particular addiction that the individual has been into. So two things are needed. You need to approach it through discipleship class, where you expose the individual to the Word of God. There is this inward transformation, because what he or she needs is inner healing. All right, the Word of God goes right in to heal this individual and restore, and there is this transformation. All right, the Bible says, "Do not conform to the standard of the world, but be ye transformed by the renewal of your mind." So there is a need for renewal of mind, even though the spiritual aspect has been taken care of, the demon has been expelled, but there is need for renewal of mind. And from the therapeutic perspective, this individual needs to go through what we call inner healing process. All right, because there are other factors that need to be addressed. As the individual has the tendency to relapse. Okay, the concept of relapse occurs when an individual who has experienced sober, all right, who has experienced freedom for a number of times, accidentally or mistakenly fall back to it again. And most time when people relapse, the effects tend to be more devastating than the former, all right, because of some neurological complication. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah.
The second question is, do you have any proof why you think gay is abnormal from a natural perspective?
Yes, of course, we have a biblical proof, but because you are talking about the natural proof, so let's talk about nature. All right, you see, the very essence, the very nature of gay itself, from a natural perspective, has already faulted it. For instance, when you look at our physiological makeup, or let's say our reproductive makeup, the male has the penis, while the female has the vagina. Now, there's something else both have in common. They have anus. All right. Now, let us look at the structure. When you look at the woman's vagina, there are two muscular layers or muscular arrangements that God designed, or nature designed. Let's favor your nature question. That nature designed to aid the activities, all right, that were supposed to take place within that area. Now we have the external muscular arrangement that aids penetration of penis, right? Now we also have the internal muscular arrangement that aid the birth of a child. So something goes in, something goes out. Nature made provision for it. And when you look at it the other way, the anal sex, where people have sex through the anus, you discover that nature didn't make any provision for that. We only have one muscular arrangement in the anus, which is internal, that's designed to aid physics, right? Help us to defecate. Now, but there's no external arrangement that aids penetration, be it penis or whatever gadget they use these days. All right. So when you look at it from a natural perspective, you discover that nature designed sex to take place in the vagina, not anywhere else. So the use of anus for the gay community is naturally faulted. And then when you look at the animal kingdom, for instance, such aberration doesn't exist. So you discover that it is really a product of perversion as a result of some ideological proclivities that drives people's sexual propensities. So there are many reasons why we can say that gay is really not how it was designed. But like you say, from the natural perspective, you have seen that nature didn't make provision for sex to take place in the anus. It only makes provision for sex to take place in the vagina. That means it's between a man and a woman, between Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Thank you.
Can you share some of the consequences of pornographic addiction?
Yes, there are so many consequences when we talk about pornographic addiction. Number one, there is the distortion of ideal imagery of gender expressions. For instance, you may be a young man who you are having issues choosing a wife. It's not necessarily because God haven't shown you who to marry or you've not seen someone you want to marry. But you see, when you are indulging pornography, pornography tends to give you an ideal concept of what a woman, for instance, I'm talking about a male, an ideal concept of what a woman's body should look like. And these are better from the ideations in the pornography. Unfortunately, some of the imageries that are projected through pornography, they are not real. All right, they are not real. And when our brain, through the wiring of the neural pathway, gets to assimilate or desensitize, all right, in order to accommodate those imageries we see in the pornography. So it unconsciously becomes a default mode of our idea of what a woman should be. And we go about looking for people unconsciously, looking for people who fit into those modes that we have in our mind unconsciously. And this, you see, is part of the reason why we have something like infidelity in marriage, right? You could see a man is married to a woman, but there is a mode in the mindset that he or she, despite the fact that he has a woman, has a wife, and is having sex with the wife, is not satisfied. All right, maybe when women give birth, something happens to their structure. So maybe there is now disalignment with the initial structure that attracted him, for instance, to get married to his wife, right? So he's now looking for another woman that fits into that mode. And this is why people go about, sleeping around, messing up with girls. It's driven by an installation, which is actually a consequence of illicit pornographic exposure. And then one other thing that pornography does is that it creates pressure. All right, it creates pressure in your mind. It desensitizes the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for impulse control. It also affects the limbic system, which is also responsible for your emotional control. Now, another thing that pornography does is it builds addiction faster because of the activities of the pleasure circuit, in the brain, which is located somewhere below the cerebral cortex. And in this pleasure circuit, we have three major elements that makes pornography deadly. One of those elements is what we call the nucleus accumbens, and the second one is what we call hippocampus. We also have the third one, amygdala. Now, these three elements, they play interwoven role that, when you are exposed to pornography, for instance, your brain has a way to rewire itself to connect to pornography. I don't know if you're getting my point. Now, once you have that connection with pornography, your pleasure wiring, tend to assimilate pornography as a template in such a way that even when you are having sex with your wife, something that should be peaceful and normal, all right, you're unconsciously trying to respond to that sexual intercourse based on what has been installed in your mind. So pornography causes a lot of distortion, apart from the fact that it opens up the soul structure. All right, it opens up the soul structure to corruption. When I talk about structure, there are three major elements within the human soul. We have the will, we have the emotion, and we have the intellect. All right. So when we keep on exposing ourselves to pornography, it hijacks our will. It corrupts the will. It desensitizes the will to respond to sex in certain way, and that affects our prefrontal cortex. And also the emotion, we have our limbic system is affected, all right, such that we tend to lose control. All right, you see somebody becoming vulnerable. You can see a professor, for instance, who just to have a sex with an 18-year-old girl can just go ahead and give an A mark, right? Even when he knows that that young woman didn't score that mark, but he is no longer in control. Something else is in control of the emotion. So that kind of looseness in emotion is one of the major consequences in pornography. And of course, the intellect, the way we reason, our mind is corrupted, and you see lust becomes the order of the day. And when someone is into lust, it affects your normal daily activity, it affects your spiritual life. Today you are up, today you are down, and you see there's this instability it gives to us. So there are many consequences when you talk about pornography. Yes. Yeah.
So, Sam, what do you think is the impact of masturbation in marriage?
Yeah, the impact of masturbation in marriage is idiosyncratic, quite all right. It is idiosyncratic in the sense that people respond to it in different ways because of how it impacted on them. For some, even when they have had intercourse with their wife, they are not satisfied because their brain has wired to interpret pleasure through hand appliance application. All right, through hand application, the brain is wired, is sensitized to interpret sex through that means, so that even after the vaginal contact has been made, the person is not satisfied. It's seeking for pornography. And one thing about masturbation in marriage is that even when you're married, you still struggle with it. All right, you see that your wife cannot be able to meet up to your desire for sex, because the stimulation of sex via masturbation tend to be higher when it comes to when we contrast it with vaginal intercourse. You know, in the masturbation aspect, for instance, you are trying to use an unnatural means to satisfy a natural craving, and you see there is a contradiction already. Okay, so I think this whole thing is man trying to interfere with nature. The adverse effect is that it affects the natural arrangement of how things ought to be. All right, so that the best thing to do is to I will always say, tell my clients that a preserved life is better than a repaired life. All right, it's better to zip up and wait than to unzip and waste. All right, so God designed sex to take place only in the confines of marriage. And I must tell you, despite the way you see lust pushing people as single persons, when you get married, you see that it's not what it really is. All right, you cannot have sex one day consecutively daily basis. You know, there's this fantasy that when I get married, I'll have sex in the kitchen, I'll have sex in the room. You will do that for 1 year, and the tempo will begin to go down. I don't know if you understand. But so the whole alteration, the whole interferences before marriage isn't necessarily in the first place. So that's why in our campaign, we preach abstinence. All right, for people to hold on. When you get into marriage, you do these things and you'll be tired. You know. So